Meeting Michael's family for the first time was an experience I'll never forget, especially when it came to his sister, Sophie. While the rest of his family was warm and welcoming, Sophie seemed distant and disinterested in getting to know me. During lunch, she barely acknowledged me, and when I tried to start a conversation, she avoided any interaction. Determined to break the ice, I followed her to the washroom, hoping for a private moment to talk. Instead, I found her sneaking tissue paper into her purse. We locked eyes, and it was clear she hadn't expected to be caught. I decided not to confront her or make a scene, so I left the washroom quietly. Later, I brought it up with Michael, expecting some concern. But his reaction surprised me. He just laughed it off, saying she probably needed a tissue and that I was overthinking it. I tried to let it go, but something about the situation didn't sit well with me. Over time, I noticed other strange incidents with Sophie, like when we all went shopping together. She kept disappearing into fitting rooms with clothes and coming out empty-handed, claiming nothing suited her. It seemed harmless at first, but the pattern of behavior started to make me wonder. After our shopping trip, Sophie even offered to pay for everyone's ice cream, which only added to my growing unease. As Sophie opened her bag to get her wallet, I noticed a familiar blue dress inside. The same one she had tried on earlier and dismissed as too tight. I couldn't figure out why the dress was in her handbag, and it set off alarm bells. Curious, I asked when she bought the dress, since I hadn't seen her make a purchase. My question caught Laura's attention, and she too noticed the dress in Sophie's bag. Sophie quickly tried to hide it, closing her bag and avoiding eye contact. It was obvious she had stolen the dress, and I just stared at her in disbelief as she stumbled over her words. Laura stepped in, downplaying the situation, suggesting maybe it was a mistake, and that people sometimes accidentally take things. I was shocked by her response, and she must have noticed because she quickly backtracked, saying she didn't think Sophie would do such a thing, and that we should just let it go. I disagreed, insisting that if it was a genuine mistake, we should correct it by returning the dress. Laura resisted, arguing that the store was a large corporation, and one missing dress wouldn't hurt them. Despite her objections, I stood firm. I made it clear that I was going back to pay for the dress, with or without them. Reluctantly, Laura and Sophie agreed to accompany me back to the store, and in the end, I had to pay for the dress, since Sophie didn't even have enough money. The whole ordeal left a bad taste in my mouth. That evening, I tried to discuss the incident with Michael. I explained how uncomfortable it had made me. To my surprise, Michael told me I should have let it go, arguing that it wasn't harming anyone. His reaction frustrated me. I told him I couldn't ignore what I felt was my moral responsibility, even if his family seemed okay with it. Michael took offense, and our conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. He demanded an apology for my comments about his family, but I refused. Things got so tense that I even considered ending the relationship if we couldn't find common ground. After a few days of cooling off, Michael came back with an apology. We had a long talk and realized that arguing over our families wasn't worth risking our relationship. He admitted he was protective of his sister, but understood why I felt the way I did. He even offered to reimburse me for the dress, but I declined, appreciating the gesture. Since then, I've decided to keep quiet about his sister. The next incident involving Sophie happened at Michael's cousin's baby shower. The baby shower was filled with excitement, as everyone gathered with gifts from the registry. Michael's cousin, glowing with joy and just 2 months away from giving birth, was the center of attention. We helped her cut the cake, opened some presents, and shared in the happiness of the day. Later, I excused myself to use the washroom. As I passed the bedroom, I was stunned to see Sophie rummaging through the gift boxes, clearly searching for something to take. My heart sank. She was planning to steal from an expectant mother who needed these gifts far more than Sophie did. I had promised myself to stay quiet about Sophie after the last incident, but I couldn't stand by and let this happen. The thought of an expectant mother losing essential baby items to Sophie's compulsion was unbearable. Determined to handle it subtly, I decided not to confront her directly. Instead, I walked back a few steps and cleared my throat as I passed by again, hoping Sophie would catch on. When I approached the bedroom, I casually greeted her as if I was just passing through. Sophie's reaction was immediate. She quickly stopped, got up, and rejoined the guests in the living room. I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief at how far she would go to satisfy her urge to steal. It was clear just how serious her problem was, and it left me even more uneasy about her presence at family events. This time, I chose not to mention it to Michael. I didn't want another argument where he'd defend his sister, pretending she didn't have a serious issue. The final straw came at our wedding. My mother had given me a pair of beautiful blue earrings, a family heirloom passed down through generations. These earrings were my something blue for the ceremony, and they meant the world to me. After the ceremony, with Michael and I officially married, I planned to change into a more comfortable outfit for the reception. I left the earrings in my bridal room, confident they'd be safe. The venue was secure, and only our trusted guests were present. The reception was perfect. Michael and I danced the night away, surrounded by love and happiness. It was a magical evening, and I was thrilled to finally call him my husband. But in the early hours of the morning, when my bridesmaids and I returned to the bridal suite to pack up, I noticed the earrings were missing. Panic set in as we searched the room, hoping they'd just been misplaced. I knew my bridesmaids. They were childhood friends who would never steal from me. We tore the room apart, checking every nook and cranny. My heart pounded as I realized the earrings were truly gone. Devastation hit me hard. These earrings held so much meaning, far beyond their monetary value. Those earrings symbolized my family's heritage, and as we kept searching, a terrible suspicion began to grow. There was only one person at our wedding who I knew could steal. Sophie's strange behavior throughout the evening hadn't gone unnoticed. She had hovered around the bridal room earlier and disappeared for a while during the reception. Looking back, it all seemed suspicious. The thought that she might have taken the earrings made my heart sink. I didn't want to confront her, especially on my wedding night, but the idea of losing such a precious heirloom was unbearable. Steadying my nerves, I approached her calmly. Surrounded by family, I asked if she had seen my earrings. Her eyes widened as she stammered out a denial, but her reaction only confirmed my fears. My bridesmaids sensed the tension and gathered around us, their faces showing concern and suspicion. The room grew heavy with unease as I pressed Sophie, my voice trembling with both fear and anger. Laura approached, curious and concerned, but I gestured for her to stop. Locking eyes with Sophie, I repeated my question more firmly. She looked increasingly uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the room. Just then, Michael came over, sensing the tension. He tried to pull me away, suggesting I'd had too much to drink. His words only fueled my frustration. I turned to him, steady but angry, and told him I hadn't touched much alcohol that night, so he shouldn't make such a ridiculous suggestion. Turning back to Sophie, I glared at her, my patience running thin. The room fell silent as everyone watched. Sophie's face turned pale, and she began to stammer, denying any wrongdoing, but I could see through her act. Finally, with a shaky hand, she reached into her purse and pulled out my earrings. She handed them to me with a mumbled apology, avoiding my eyes. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger and betrayal. Laura and Michael were stunned. Laura's face flushed with embarrassment, and Michael's expression shifted from disbelief to anger as he realized what had happened. "I can't believe you would do this on our wedding day," I said, my voice shaking with hurt and fury. Sophie mumbled another apology, but it felt empty. This wasn't just about the earrings. It was about trust and respect. Michael, now fully grasping the situation, turned to Sophie, his voice low and intense. "How could you do this?" he demanded. Sophie had no answer. She just stood there, looking down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. This incident was the final straw. It confirmed all my worst fears about her kleptomania and strengthened my resolve to protect myself from her destructive behavior. For the first time, Michael stood by me, acknowledging that what Sophie had done was unacceptable. My mother, who had witnessed everything, was far less forgiving. She angrily told Sophie that stealing from her own family was beyond disgraceful. Laura tried to defend her daughter, suggesting it might have been an accident, but I had reached my limit. I turned to Laura and with a calm but firm voice, said, "Laura, you know your daughter has a problem. She needs therapy before she takes something even more valuable." My words seemed to hit Laura hard. She started to respond, but then thought better of it and stayed silent. Sophie, meanwhile, looked even more ashamed. My mother, still furious, added, "This was your brother's wedding, a day meant for celebration. How could you ruin it by stealing something so precious?" The room was silent, and I could feel the eyes of our guests on us, their shock and discomfort clear. The joyous atmosphere of the wedding had been shattered by Sophie's actions. In the days after our wedding, Michael and I had several long talks about Sophie and how we would handle her in the future. He apologized for doubting me and agreed that Sophie needed professional help. We decided to set clear boundaries to protect ourselves and our future family. Michael eventually spoke with his mother, and after some pressure from family and friends, Laura finally admitted that Sophie had a problem. It wasn't easy for her to accept, but she realized she couldn't keep ignoring her daughter's issues. Laura took action, arranging for Sophie to see a therapist. Sophie also joined a kleptomaniac support group, where she connected with others facing similar struggles. This support helped her open up about her addiction and begin to understand it better. Although I didn't stay in touch with Sophie after the wedding incident, I kept up with her through Michael. Despite the hurt and betrayal, I hoped she could recover from her addiction. Over the years, Sophie seemed to make significant progress. She even met someone from her support group who understood her struggles, and they eventually got married. To our surprise, Sophie and her partner had a shotgun wedding, keeping it very private. They didn't invite anyone, and only informed us through Laura the day after. Michael and I were initially shocked by the secrecy, but we understood that Sophie needed something low-key and personal, away from the pressure of a big family event. Even though we weren't part of the celebration, we were genuinely happy for her and wished her well. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't last. Sophie's husband was caught stealing from his workplace, taking important documents and equipment. His repeated thefts led to his arrest and sentencing. The news devastated Sophie. With nowhere else to go and no job to support herself, she had no choice but to move back in with Laura. Laura took Sophie in for a few months, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't a sustainable solution. With limited finances, Laura struggled to support her jobless daughter, and Sophie wasn't making any progress in getting back on her feet. Laura grew tired of the situation. Knowing that Michael and I had a larger place without rent, Laura reached out to Michael, asking if Sophie could stay with us for a while to get back on her feet. When Michael brought up the idea, I was firmly against it. We had just welcomed a baby boy, and balancing work with caring for our son was already overwhelming. The thought of having Sophie, someone with a history of stealing, in our home added stress I didn't need. I asked Michael if Sophie had even started looking for a job during her time at Laura's, but he shook his head no. Still, Michael assured me that perhaps staying with us would motivate Sophie to improve her situation. He believed that, as her brother, he needed to support her during this difficult time. He also assured me that Sophie had changed and was no longer a kleptomaniac. Despite my strong reservations, I reluctantly agreed to let Sophie move in, hoping that Michael's faith in her would prove true. Sophie moved into our guest room, and at first, she was polite and friendly. It seemed like she'd changed, but I remained cautious, keeping a close eye on my belongings. Sophie initially appeared grateful and promised to look for a job and contribute to the household. However, weeks passed with little sign of progress. Sophie spent most of her days in her room, doing nothing but sleeping and only emerging when she was hungry. I began to worry we had made a mistake. Michael tried to reassure me, reminding me that Sophie needed our support. I wanted to believe him, but my anxiety grew. Despite my doubts, I continued to support Michael's decision, hoping our help would make a difference in Sophie's life. But then, items started going missing from my kitchen. My expensive ceramic plate, which I reserved for guests, mysteriously disappeared just when I needed it for a visitor. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I might have misplaced it. But deep down, I knew I was usually organized about such things. The suspicion lingered, but I chose to dismiss it, hoping it was just a mistake. Then, one morning, my cherished childhood mug, a gift from my grandfather that I had used daily for years, vanished. This wasn't just weird. It was a significant loss because of the sentimental value attached to it. When I couldn't find the mug, I asked Michael to help search the house. He knew how much that mug meant to me, and he was concerned too. When we couldn't find it anywhere, I suggested confronting Sophie since she was the only other person in the house. However, Michael discouraged me, arguing that Sophie was already going through a tough time and urging me to let him handle it. Reluctantly, I agreed. When Michael confronted Sophie about the missing items, she adamantly denied taking them, insisting we must have misplaced them. I could hear their heated argument echoing from her room. Sophie refused to accept any responsibility, and Michael, still protective of his sister, came out of the room to tell me she had nothing to do with the missing items. I couldn't believe how deluded he was being. Given Sophie's past, it was hard to think she was suddenly innocent. Frustrated and feeling like I needed to take control, I started locking away all my important belongings. I even bought another safe from Amazon specifically for my expensive perfumes and makeup. Michael thought I was overreacting and accused me of not trusting his sister. In the middle of our argument, he called me a bored, stay-at-home mom, which was absurd. I had a thriving freelance career, earning more than enough while also taking care of our son full-time. I fired back, reminding him that just because I didn't go to an office every day didn't mean my work was any less important. I managed the house, cared for our child, and still contributed financially. I told him clearly that as long as Sophie stayed with us, things would keep disappearing. Whether she had gone back to her old ways or never stopped, it didn't matter. I needed to protect what was mine. But Michael refused to believe Sophie was stealing from us. We were at odds, him defending her, and me trying to safeguard our home. I didn't have to wait long for my suspicions to be confirmed. Yesterday, as Michael was getting ready for work, he discovered his laptop was missing. At first, he asked if I had taken it, but I reminded him I had my own. He then thought he might have left it at the office, but when he realized his wallet was also missing, things got serious. His wallet wasn't just any wallet. It had a substantial amount of money, his driver's license, and credit cards. Panic set in as he searched the house, checking every possible spot. I could see his anxiety growing with every minute that passed. Meanwhile, I sat there, knowing exactly who was responsible. Michael called out for Sophie, his voice growing more frantic, but there was no response. He rushed to her room, only to find it empty. He kept calling for her, his voice echoing through the house, but still nothing. When he turned to me and asked if I knew where she was, I just shrugged, unable to hide my satisfaction. Michael's frustration was clear as he tried calling Sophie repeatedly, only to be met with silence. His anger escalated as he dialed his mother to vent, but instead of the sympathy he expected, Laura tried to calm him down by minimizing the situation. She suggested that even if Sophie had stolen his wallet, everything inside could be replaced. This only made Michael angrier. He erupted, telling her that Sophie had no right to steal from him, especially after he had been defending her to me all this time. I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief, realizing how much this family coddled Sophie, even when her actions had serious consequences. When Sophie finally returned home that evening, after ignoring Michael's calls all day, she looked like she had just come from a bar, clearly intoxicated. Michael, who had spent the day consumed with worry, immediately confronted her about the missing laptop and wallet. Sophie, still drunk, tried to calm him down by denying any involvement. But Michael's patience had run out. He threatened to call the authorities if she didn't come clean. Faced with this ultimatum, Sophie broke down and tearfully admitted the truth. Sophie revealed that she had started an online store and had been systematically stealing from us to sell our belongings. My disbelief turned to horror when she confessed to everything she had taken, including my breast milk, which she claimed fetched a good price. I was disgusted as she listed the items she had stolen, from Michael's belongings to my cherished ceramics, and even my old mug. Michael, overwhelmed with anger and betrayal, began shouting at her for violating our trust. As I write this, Sophie is still in our home, and I am utterly disgusted by her presence. I feel strongly that she needs to leave, and I believe my husband needs to stand up and handle this situation. Out of all the things she has done, stealing my breast milk, meant for our baby, is the most disturbing. I want to call the police, but I know it would seriously damage my relationship with Michael. Am I wrong if I kick my sister-in-law out after everything she's stolen? Update. 1. When I posted this last week, I never expected it to gain so much attention. Some of you have even suggested I leave my husband over this, but I'm not going to end my marriage just because Michael has a kleptomaniac sister. Like many people, my husband has a soft spot for his family, and I understand and respect that. Despite our disagreements about Sophie, he's the one who has suffered the most, especially after she stole his laptop and wallet. For clarity, Sophie did return his credit cards, but she had already sold the wallet and laptop and used the cash she found in his wallet for drinking at a bar. Now for the main update. Last week, I reached my breaking point. I gave Michael an ultimatum. Either he asked Sophie to move out, or I would take our son and go to my parents' place. I couldn't live with someone who would steal my breast milk and sell it to strangers. It was beyond creepy and disgusting. To my surprise, Michael admitted he had been thinking the same thing. He was relieved I brought it up and assured me he would ask Sophie to leave. We both sat down with her and gave her a day's notice to move out. At first, Sophie panicked and called Laura, who then called Michael to try to change his mind. But Michael had reached his limit. He firmly told Laura that she needed to take care of her daughter because he had to prioritize me and our baby. He also didn't hold back in telling Laura about all the bizarre things Sophie had been stealing, which effectively silenced her. Sophie officially moved out yesterday. I know it might not sound kind, but I'm glad she's finally gone. I'm also relieved that Michael has learned his lesson and will never invite